Okay.
Alright, so as Marge mentioned, I'll be talking about a lot of different things. Just sort of as a quick reference, this photo here on the left is taken in Billings, Montana. The agates aren't the best, and you can't quite find them, but it's a really nice picturesque sort of photo, so I figured I would start with that. So some of the different things, like I mentioned, I'll talk a little bit about how agates form and what an agate is. I'll also go into some of the different types of agates that you can find, more of just sort of a show of sort of what you can find as far as agates on the Yellowstone River, and also go into some of the history and some of the uses that people have for Montana agates. And then at the end here I'll go through, if you want to actually go out and find them yourself, I've got some locations and also a lot of tips then on how you can actually go and find these out in the raw. Oops, wrong arrow. So agates, if you didn't know, actually came from the Agates River in Sicily from Theophrastus in about 300 BC, and that's where the name agate comes from. It's a variety of quartz or chalcedony with a hardness of about 7, which will actually come into play important later, so it's harder than glass and steel. Typical agates contain actually about 90% quartz and 10% mogonite. The variety of mogonite is also a silica mineral, and it can vary. I've seen it mentioned as high as like 15%, and it can be down to 0. There's some discussion as to if you can actually use mogonite to determine the age of an agate, but I won't get into that. So if you want to do any research, that's something you can look at. I haven't found anything specific to Montana agates as far as what the composition actually is, but typically it's around 90% quartz and 10% mogonite. And like I said, they're both silica minerals. So the way that an agate forms is by, one, you need to have silica, and then you need to have water so that you can dissolve it and form a silica gel, and you need to have some sort of void that it can take the shape of. So a lot of times in rocks you can have different vesicles or other holes in the rocks, and a lot of volcanic rocks that provide not only your silica then, but also your voids that can form your agates. And I thought it was interesting researching, apparently the fibers for agates, the silica grow in a helical fashion perpendicular to the normal growth direction, and that is what causes your banding in your agates. Instead of growing like a typical crystal, they can grow as bands. And this is, I've actually got this agate right here, which I had found in Montana, which has some really nice banding in it. So one of the big draws to Montana agates are the dendrites. So from Mindat, Montana moss agates frequently contain green mineral inclusions or brown to black dendrites, which are iron or manganese oxides. So the composition of those then are your iron and manganese. A lot of the redder colors you see are more iron, and then your black and browns are more of your manganese oxides. You can find them in the Yellowstone River gravel deposits that are Pleistocene in age, so from 12,000 years to 2.6 million years ago. The origin is actually from the Yellowstone National Park area, but not actually the volcano itself. And I'll get into that in a second. As I mentioned before, you need to have voids, so you can actually have different things, not only from gas bubbles, but trees. So if you have a tree that a lava flow encounters and it gets burned up, you will have a hole left over from the tree, and if an agate forms in that, you can get what's called a limb cast. And this photo here is of a friend, Sean. This is actually Craters of the Moon in Idaho, and he's standing in what used to be a tree, and the lava flow then burned it and left that hole. So you can imagine if you have some water with silica that was to invade that hole and solidify, it would preserve that shape of that tree then. Let's see here. It can also be found in other gravel deposits, so not just your Yellowstone River deposits, but you can also find agates in the 6 Mile Creek and Flaxville formations, which go back to about 10 million years ago. And for the largest that I could find that anyone mentioned of an agate was actually 63.5 pounds, which was found obviously close to the source. So it was found in Jardine, Montana, which I had to look up, and is just northeast of Gardner, Montana, which if you're not sure where Gardner is, it's the north entrance to Yellowstone National Park. So as I mentioned, you can find them in some of the gravels in the northern part of Montana that go back as far as 10 million years ago. And the oldest of the Yellowstone eruptions was only a couple million years ago. So we know then that if you can find them in gravels older than 2 million years, it didn't come from the park itself. And so this was taken from the Yellowstone National Park Service website. Mentions that during the Cenozoic era, or approximately the last 66 million years, widespread mountain building, volcanism, faulting, and glaciation sculpted the Yellowstone area. The Absaroka Range along the park's north and east sides was formed by numerous volcanic eruptions about 50 million years ago. And this period is not related to the present Yellowstone volcano. And this volcanism is what's believed then to be the source for your Montana agates. So these agates then are related to the volcanics that was around 50 million years ago. And this is a diagram here, use this, on the right showing the location of the hot spot at different points in time through history. So you can see here, present day only about 2 million years ago, and even back going to 50 million years, the hot spot wasn't even around at that time. And for those curious, this is what the North American actually looked like 50 million years ago. So you can see here in the area of Montana, there's a lot of mountain building going on and other volcanics in that area, but somewhat similar to present day. So that'll bring me to my first video, which actually relates to petrified wood in Washington, but the process is the same for all petrified wood and similar to how agates form in itself. So I figured it would be a good video. It says 2-minute geology, but it's actually about 3 minutes. So yeah. So let me just quick play that and. Uses for Montana agates. One thing that, because of its properties being silica, it's similar to chert or flint, so it was used in arrowheads. And this photo here in the upper right is actually from someone that made modern day arrowheads out of Montana moss agates. This was not one that was found prehistorically. And throughout the area you can find evidence of Native Americans. This in the lower part here is from the Pictograph Cave in Billings, which this photo is enhanced, but there's a cave in Billings that you can find some cave drawings. That's a state park in Billings. And sort of trying to find some more hard evidence of Native Americans using Montana moss agates, I came across this, which is from the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service page on the Lake Ilo National Wildlife Refuge, which is in North Dakota. And for reference, it's located right here. This is Interstate 94, and Glendive is over here, Montana. So it's just a little bit south of Williston in that area. So it says, during the Folsom period, small multifamily groups hunted throughout the huge expanses of grassland. These groups probably moved camps 12 to 36 times a year. In order to survive, these groups had plans to frequent visits for flint, chert, obsidian deposits to acquire for stone tools. Archaeologists working at the Lake Ilo National Wildlife Refuge discovered discarded stone tools made from the nearby Knife River flint, petrified wood from Rainy Buttes, porcelainite from the Little Missouri Badlands, moss agate from the Yellowstone River, and also obsidian, which came from Idaho. So this isn't just something that people have said, but this has been documented by archaeologists that Montana moss agates have been used for stone tools, arrowheads, and that type of thing. So coming up a little bit more recently, I found this little excerpt from the USGS Bulletin from 1917 called Useful Minerals of the United States. And you can see it mentions even back in 1917 under Montana, they've got moss agates. Found on the Yellowstone River from Glendive to Yellowstone Park, on the mesas and buttes for many miles to the northwest of the river, have been cut into beautiful gems. So even as far back as 1917, people have known sort of the usefulness of Montana agates. And just sort of another excerpt from the USGS. I'm not going to read the whole thing, but at the very last sentence here, as it mentions, agate has long been a favorite of hobbyists and professional cutters because of the beautiful and highly variable patterns, the durability and ease in cutting and polishing. So going through a little bit of the history, the first commercial cutter in Montana was actually in Miles City, and Ralph Harris, started in 1915 commercially cutting, and he actually did so until 1958. However, they believe, through my research, the first actual person who was cutting agates in Montana was John S. Larimer, and he started before 1914 in Glendive, Montana. Word of the Montana agates actually spread a little bit farther west to San Francisco, and a firm in San Francisco actually contracted someone in Billings, Montana to start sending them Montana agates. And he actually subcontracted someone in Miles City, and they were actually shipping Montana agates by what they called the train carload out west to San Francisco, and actually did that from 1919 to 1920. And there's stories that in 1920 the firm suddenly stopped and said, we don't want any more, and they had in Miles City piles of agates ready to be shipped. And there was actually supposedly a bar in Miles City that in their basement they just have piles of Montana agates that were from when they had ordered shipment and then suddenly stopped. One of the interesting things I thought, sort of a local relation, Howard Sissel, he started gathering agates around 1912 near Sidney, Montana, and then in 1927 he built his own saw to cut agates. In 1930 then he set up his own lapidary shop in Sidney, Montana, and later he attended the Northwestern University and Chicago School of Jewelry and Watchmaking. So a little bit of relation to Chicago. So hopefully you guys have had a chance to see some of the different types of agates that I've found. Some of the agate types I'll talk about I don't have any examples of, but there are lots of different types of agates you can find. So some of the biggest and most popular are the dendrites. Tom Harmon, who I've got some books up here, who's sort of world famous for his Montana agates, he's actually got an entire book just on dendrites. I've also got a lot of banded agates, and I've shown some pictures before, and then you can also find typical moss agates. Montana moss agates is sort of a catch-all for all agates, but an actual moss type agate you can also find. And this one here you can see it's got a lot of green, which is due to the copper in the composition. Some of the other ones I've got some botryoidal rocks here. Pretty rarely you can also find blue agates, and I've got a couple of them up here, and here's a picture of when I found one actually in the field. And then some of the other biggest and best agates are what some call painted or scenic agates. And these are ones that dendrites and different ribbons can form, and people will interpret them as seeing mountains or trees or even different animals. And I've found some small ones, but you can find some really large ones. This right here is taken from a video that someone had posted on Facebook to a Montana moss agate group, and they've got a very large collection of different sort of the painted or scenic agates. One of the other things that you can have with Montana agates is what's known as the iris effect, which is where when you cut it you can display fine banding that will reflect the light, and you can get a rainbow effect when you actually look at it in the light. I've got some other pictures that I found since I put this up, but you can see them here on the left, and then this one in the middle you can see what it looks like just sort of without light shining through the back of it, and then when you hold it up to the light you can actually see the rainbow of colors shine through your agates. As I mentioned before too, I don't have any here, but you can also have limb casts, and these photos here on the right were actually from someone who was trying to sell a whole lot of them. And these are all limb casts where, like I mentioned before, you have agates that are forming in the voids left by tree limbs or trees. So going in then to actually being able to find these agates, as I mentioned before, your hardness is around 7. So the source, as we mentioned, is near Yellowstone National Park. But you can find these all the way to the North Dakota border, hundreds of miles away. And one of the reasons you can do that is because agate is such a hard mineral. So at a hardness of 7, it'll stay that whole time. As I mentioned, it's silica. The biggest, in my opinion, most important thing to finding agates in the field is actually the luster, or how the light reflects off of the surface. Agates have what are known as a waxy luster, so you can see sort of the outside. It's not shiny and it's not really rough, but it's sort of waxy. The other thing too, agates being silica, they have conchoidal fracturing, so that C-shaped fracture, and that's something you can sometimes pick up on the shell or the raw part of an agate. If you see that, you know then that you're looking at quartz, which is probably an agate then. So that's my dog there. As I like to take her out sometimes, and she's got a nice backpack so she can carry her own weight in agates as well. And
how many pounds?
I'm
just joking.
What kind of a dog?
She's a border collie mix. Her name's Breccia. So going out then and actually finding them, what's been known as to be the best areas. This is from a really old book. Are the areas between Custer and Sydney, so you might know Custer, named after Custer's last stand. Bighorn is down in here. So Billings, right here, if you fly into there, it's about 100 miles or so to Forsyth, and then another 50 to Miles City, and another 50, 75 to Glendive. One interesting thing is this follows, just outside of Billings, Interstate 94 begins. And you can follow that all the way down, and it pretty much follows the train tracks, which is why the towns are spaced so evenly apart, because the trains needed time to fuel up after so many miles. So a lot of the towns are either 50 or 100 miles apart. So this is your main agate area. Here's your North Dakota border, so from Sydney to Custer or so. So one of the other videos I want to show, it's a short, this is from what's known as the Minute Earth series. So it's actually about 2 minutes. And it's talking about how rivers form, and I'll discuss after it how we can use that information to look for agates. It's hard to see without a cursor. Is that as a river curves, you have what's known as a point bar on the inside of the curve, and on the outside you have what's known as a cut bank, because on the inside of the curve your flow is going slower, so you can't carry the bigger material, and that material then drops out. And so, or I guess the finer materials, and that is what drops out. So when you're looking for agates then, if you want to figure out what side of the river you want to look at, you want to go then to where you're actually depositing new material rather than looking at the old material. So, for instance, this photo right here was taken on one of my many trips in the Yellowstone, and without sort of being able to see the background, you can actually tell them which way the river is curving, because on the outside you have steep banks, which is where it is cutting, and then on the inside here, you actually are depositing material. One of the things too to note is that the newer the material, the less vegetation you're going to have. So if you're looking at possibly finding historical places of, like they mentioned, Oxbow Lakes or old channels, if you see the vegetation, you can tell sort of how old it is relatively. And you can sort of see that here where you have no grass, and then you have smaller grass, and then it gets up to more and taller grass, and then even as you get further, you can have trees. So if you look at a map of a river and you're trying to figure out where there might be new material or new channels, or you're out there in person, finding areas without vegetation might be a good place to start. Or, on the other hand, that might be the most obvious and most picked over place, and if you can find places where the river used to be, you might be able to find some places that someone hasn't thought of looking either. So, with that in mind, this is a Google Earth image of one of the areas that I have gone and collected some of these agates. This is actually near Miles City in Montana. And just sort of looking at this, I'm guessing you might be able to find some areas just at a quick glance where you might be looking for agates. So this is your main, actually the main channel here. Different parts of the Yellowstone sometimes splits into different channels. And you've got a side channel here. And on this, even in the small curve of the side channel, you've got your deposition of rocks going out, your gravel here. And then down here too, where you've got another curve, you can also see there. This area here, you can actually walk out and you can see a trail, so you can actually, if you get through the trees there, you can actually get to where that is. If you've got a boat, these other areas in here might be good, but you can see here too, some of the areas where you've got trees then on these islands in the middle of the river. They've been there for a long time, they're overly vegetated, it might be sort of hard to find anything even if there's a lot of vegetation. But looking at this photo, there's actually one other place that you might be able to find agates. Oh, wrong button. Okay. And that is actually, if you look right in here, you can see some gravel peeking through. And if you zoom in, then you can see this actually used to be where the river is. And if you're out there in person, this down here is sort of a cut bank. It's about 6 feet or so high. So this is actually up above the river, and then it's cut down. But this is an old, as they might mention, a terrace or a mesa, that you've got old river deposits here. This is just downstream. This is sort of what the gravel looks like in some of these side channels where you can just walk out. You've got sort of a vast expanse of gravel. And this photo down here is actually taken in one of these little sort of, not quite valleys, but little depressions of some of this. And you can see just walking, the whole area is gravel, but it's not actively being deposited. So you might not find some agates, but I've gone through here and it looks like no one's ever been there. So people might have just walked by looking to just go down to the river. So one of those things to keep in mind if you're looking for locations. This one I also don't mind because it's not the best. This is taken near Huntley, Montana, which is actually immediately to the east of Billings, Montana. Almost a suburb in a sense because they're right up next to each other. So this is the Huntley Bridge, and then you can see here this really clearly shows, I like this because it shows your bends in your river and how on the inside you're depositing material. And so down here you can actually park near the bridge and walk along this whole expanse here of what's about a mile of gravel you can just walk along. And then of course you have some of your side channels where on some of your bends you're getting gravel, and you've got all sorts of other fluvial morphology that I won't get into. So actually finding Montana agates, then once you get to your gravel, what do they look like? Well, as I mentioned, one of the best things to do is to look for your waxy luster. However, sometimes because they're clear, they really jump out at you. So I've got some pictures here, so I'll give you about 20 seconds or so if you want to look and try and see how many agates you can find. There's about 1 or 2 in each photo. So go ahead and take a look and see how many you can find. So hopefully the pictures are a little clearer. I know sometimes it's hard on a projector.
Oh, that's clear.
So here are some of the obvious ones. There might be more, but some of them, like I mentioned, will pop out. They're clear. If it's sunny, you can really see right through them, and some of them you don't quite see much. It's more of that sort of a smooth, waxy luster. Same up here, you've got a nice yellow one, clear right through the light, but also peeking out in the corner here in the shadows, you've got a darker color one that you sort of, again, have to sort of look at that sort of texture of how the light's bouncing off of it. And then there's some more obvious ones, more of the yellow colors that I found a lot more. This is more around Miles City, and the one on the left is actually taken from just outside of Warden, Montana, which is just east of Billings, a little bit further past Huntley. So again, sort of looking at all your different colors of gravels and some of your little mineral deposits from the water. This is what you see when you're out on the Yellowstone then walking along. And then hopefully, after a while, you start to get good at it and you can spot agates that'll just jump out at you. So those are that was easy course. Novice level. These are actually agates. So you've got these, this is a big one right here, and this is actually an agate. It's big, so it's not going to be very translucent. I've got one of my biggest ones right here. This actually is a little bit dark, but it's full of dendrites, and that's why it's so dark. And I actually found this in the same, I believe the same area. He didn't mention his location, but I'm pretty sure I know where that is. And I actually found this in that same area. And this I found is a little dirtier, but I found it like this.
Sorry. Gotta find it to turn it on.
So the one thing too is you can get both dark and light colors on the outside of your agate. So this one over here is a lot darker. And again, you can really see that waxy luster of how this isn't reflecting light the same as sort of the other rocks around it. And as I mentioned too, you have conchoidal fracturing, and so finding that C shape, the chatter marks as it gets tumbled down the river, you can really see that here, to where if you ever see that, you should immediately pick that up and take a look at it. And sometimes you get lucky and you get what's called a window. So it zoomed in a little bit here. You have your sort of your outside, and sometimes you'll get a break and you can actually sort of see what's on the inside, and you get lucky then and you can really see, oh, this is an agate, what's on the inside. So, did anyone see the other agate? Hiding right up there in the corner. Again, you sort of got a waxy luster. Sometimes you'll see more crystallized quartz rather than microcrystalline, but one of those things too, make sure you're always looking. What I like to do too is sometimes if I see an agate, put my foot near it and then keep looking, because you can find a lot of them where not only do you find one, but you can find multiple ones. And this photo was taken from a Billings Gazette article on finding agates, and I just like it because, like again, it shows sort of a window where you can see the dendrites inside, but if you were to just see the outside, you might not think it's an agate then. The best rule of thumb is always, if you think it might be, pick it up, because you never know. Sort of like fishing, hook sets are free. Rock hunting, it's free to pick up any rock. You can always throw it away. So some of the other things then that I found on the Yellowstone, I found a lot of petrified wood. These are some of, I might even have some of them up here, some of the ones that I've tumbled and polished. And this is one right here that I found that what it looks like in the raw. I found it with a brachiopod fossil. I've also found on the bottom left there, I believe, is a large stromatolite. And then I found other different miscellaneous things. These in the middle here are teeth, and from everyone that I've talked to, I've not been able to find a definitive how you can tell the difference between cattle teeth and bison teeth. If you go on Facebook and find Montana moss agate collector groups, you'll sometimes come across people that'll find large, fully intact wagon wheels and even full bison heads that have been buried by the river, and then as the river comes back or changes its course or exposes new gravel, it'll actually expose those types of things. So arrowheads, even, the kind of stuff you can sometimes find new material. And then sometimes you find odd things. I found this, which is sort of like a green agate at one of my spots. So I just wanted to end it with this. This is a photo, actually one of my first dates with my wife in Billings, Montana. These are a bunch of shale hills on the other side. And then I also just wanted to share, there was a poem that came out of Meanderings of a Rockhound by Paul Fry in 1972. And the poem, Rockhounds, was written by Paul Graupner from Broadus. Montana, which, as a side trivia, Broadus is known as the wavingest city in Montana because apparently everyone will wave at you as you drive along. So there are hounds, you know, that hunt the fox. Now we are hounds that hunt the rock. We have rocks in the car, rocks in the shed. Some even say we have rocks in the head. But we love to hunt them on river and hill, and to cut one in two is always a thrill. Although you may travel far from your home, you will find nothing as grand as a good agate stone. God hid them in a mysterious way that we may be found in our time and day. So we might dig and hunt and hike. Each one is different, no two are alike. To be out there in your walking shoes is always a cure for the worst of blues. So come with us and have a good look around, and you may become an avid rock hound.
That's awesome.
That's good.
That's good.
Yeah.
That's really good.
So that concludes our presentation. So if anyone has any questions. Yes.